sound of children's laughter abruptly cut short by a piercing, raw scream. Close-up, fists hammering on glass. A shadow with wild, long gray hair filling the frame. A child's wide, terrified eyes reflected in the glass. Voice, raspy, cold. "You think this is a game? You have no idea what you've disturbed." Quick cut to water, bright blue. Spilling over cracked asphalt, a stark, beautiful, dangerous contrast. Text on screen, "It was just water, until it wasn't." Final shot, the gray-haired woman's face, not angry but haunted. A single tear tracking through the rigid mask of fury. The heat was a suffocating blanket woven from Houston humidity and asphalt reflection, clinging to the skin and making every breath feel like drawing soup into the lungs. In the dead-end alley behind the derelict textile mill, a place the city had forgotten, 4 kids had built an oasis. Javi, 14, and all sharp elbows and ambition, had orchestrated it. He'd scavenged a monumental, unpuncturable vinyl advertising banner, folded it with architectural precision into a massive, shallow basin, and filled it over 2 hours with a snaking garden hose hooked up, with questionable legality, and even more questionable engineering, to a rarely used spigot behind the laundromat. The resulting pool was maybe 1.5 feet deep. Stretching 20 feet long, its blue a dazzling, temporary jewel set in the grime. Right now, Miguel, 10, and Lena, 8, were shrieking with pure, unadulterated joy, kicking water that splashed in slow-motion arcs. Sophia, Javi's 12-year-old sister, was perched on the edge, dipping her feet, a book resting unread in her lap. They weren't making a mess. They were surviving the summer. This was their escape. Then came the sound that cut through the innocent din like a scalpel, a high, sustained, and utterly furious shriek. "What in God's name do you think you are doing?" Javi, who had been leaning against the brick, watching his sister finally crack a smile, snapped his head around. He knew that voice. Everyone in their corner of the neighborhood knew the voice of Mrs. Hollis. She was standing at the alley entrance, framed by the blinding afternoon sun, making her look like a dark, wrathful silhouette. Her dress, though neat, seemed archaic, like something pulled from a dusty attic trunk. But it was her hair that demanded attention, a magnificent, terrifying cascade of silver gray reaching past her waist, shimmering like spun moonlight even in the harsh sun. It made her look less like a neighborhood crank and more like a furious ancient spirit. "Get that filth out of the street, now! You are flooding my property. You are disturbing the peace. Do you have no respect?" Javi pushed off the wall, his heart immediately hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He stepped in front of the makeshift pool, shielding the younger kids. "Mrs. Hollis, we're not on your property. This is a public alley and the water's contained. See? It's all in the tarp." The air around Mrs. Hollis seemed to vibrate with a venomous energy. She took a step forward, her eyes, a startling icy blue, fixed on him. "Contained? It's an abomination. It's a breeding ground for mosquitoes and disease. And you, young man, you are a menace. This whole block is going to pay for your selfish, disgusting little game." Miguel, seeing the terrifying intensity in her face, started to cry, his small shoulders shaking. Lena, braver, stood up in the pool, clutching his arm. Sophia quickly scrambled out of the water, pulling her damp hair back from her face. "We'll clean it up, ma'am," Sophia said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her knees were knocking. "We'll drain it right now. We promise." Mrs. Hollis didn't even look at Sophia. Her focus was entirely on Javi and the vinyl pool. The long gray hair seemed to bristle. "Clean it up? You've already caused the damage. I can hear that water seeping. It's going to ruin the foundation. It's going to bring them back." Javi narrowed his eyes. "Bring who back?" "Ma'am, the nearest foundation is 30 feet away and this tarp is thick. It's not leaking. Don't you lie to me." Her scream was so loud, so raw with a grief that seemed disproportionate to a little bit of play water, that it actually made Javi flinch. She stormed forward, closing the distance. "You are just like them. Vandalizing! Destroying! You think everything is yours for the taking!" She reached the edge of the vinyl, her black leather shoes perilously close to the waterline. The kids scrambled back, retreating to the safety of the brick wall. "Listen to me, lady," Javi started, his teenage bravado fighting a rising tide of genuine unease. If you don't back away, I'm going to call the police. You're threatening us. The threat was a match striking tinder. Mrs. Hollis didn't back away. Instead, a terrifying manic look of pure rage twisted her features. She looked down at the pool, at the clear, bright blue water that had been their salvation. And then she raised her foot. Javi yelled, "No!" She brought the heel of her shoe down with savage force onto the vinyl. The sound wasn't a satisfying pop of a balloon, but a dull, sickening thud against the stone beneath the banner, followed by the awful, ripping rah-ripe of the tough vinyl finally giving way under such concentrated, vicious force. A fissure immediately opened, and the pristine blue water gushed out, a small, violent river snaking toward the curb, carrying leaves and bits of dust. Mrs. Hollis brought her heel down again, and again, until the rip was a gaping, jagged mouth, and the pool was rapidly collapsing into a pathetic, "Wet puddle! There!" she spat, her chest heaving, her eyes wild. "Now it's gone. Now you see what happens when you disrespect me. Now you'll leave this place alone." Miguel was sobbing openly. Lena hugged him tight. Sophia watched, her face pale, her jaw tight with a quiet fury that was more frightening than Javi's loud anger. Javi felt a red, blinding heat wash over him. His oasis, his pride, his hours of work, and their only relief from the oppressive heat, destroyed in 3 seconds of pure malice. "You are a monster," Javi whispered, his voice shaking with a depth of hatred he didn't know he possessed. "We were just trying to cool off. And you did this. You're going to pay for this. I promise you, you are going to pay." Mrs. Hollis didn't even seem to hear him. She was staring at the gushing water, but her eyes looked unfocused, distant. She was still breathing heavily, but the rage was suddenly draining away, leaving her pale and brittle. Her silver hair, slightly dislodged, framed a face that was now dominated not by anger, but by a sudden profound terror. She turned her head slowly, looking past the children, past the alley wall, toward the mill building itself. "No," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Not again." The water. It's finding the way. Javi was momentarily stunned by the shift. The pure, unhinged fear on her face was deeply unsettling. He looked where she was looking, at the scarred concrete wall of the old mill. There was nothing there but crumbling brick and faded graffiti. "Finding what, old lady?" he demanded, stepping toward her. "What are you talking about?" She didn't answer him. She simply clapped her hands over her mouth as if to stifle a scream she couldn't allow out, and then, without another word, without even a glance back at the ruined pool, she turned and ran. Not a fast, spry run, but a panicked, stumbling, desperate flight, her long gray hair streaming out behind her like a battle flag of retreat. Javi stared after her. The adrenaline was slowly receding, replaced by a cold, hollow dread. The kid stood silent behind him, watching the last of the water settle into the thirsty cracks of the pavement. "What was that?" Lena whispered, her voice trembling. "She looked like she saw a ghost." Sophia stepped up to Javi, her expression hard. "She saw a ghost of herself, Javi, a miserable, hateful old woman. We're calling the police. We are making a report for vandalism." "No," Javi said slowly, still staring at the corner where Mrs. Hollis had vanished. He bent down and picked up a shard of the torn vinyl. It felt flimsy now, defeated. "She was right about one thing." "What?" Sophia asked impatiently. "She said we disturbed something," Javi mumbled, more to himself than to them. He thought about the sudden, panicked terror in her eyes, the crazy talk about finding the way. It was more than a cranky neighbor. It felt wrong. He looked down at the large, wet patch where the pool had been. The water had flowed, as he predicted, toward the curb, but a surprising amount had pooled up right around the foundation of the old textile mill wall. As he watched, the dirty water slowly began to disappear into a cluster of small, nearly invisible fractures in the old concrete. It was just water. It was just an old crazy lady, but the way she'd run, the look in her eyes, it felt like a threat had been issued not by her, but through her. "We don't call the police," Javi stated, finally turning back to his siblings. "We find out what she was so afraid of. This isn't over, not by a long shot." He looked at the mill wall, then at the tear in the vinyl, and a chill that had nothing to do with the heat prickled his skin. The water was gone, but it had left something behind. End of part 1. The sun was beginning its slow, brutal descent, painting the western sky in hues of violent orange and bruised purple. But the heat lingered, trapped in the concrete canyon of the alley. Javi, Sophia, Lena, and Miguel stood in a loose, demoralized cluster by the ruined pool, a silent vigil over their lost summer paradise. "Look, I still think we should call the cops," Sophia reiterated, her voice flat with frustration. "She committed a crime. We've got witnesses. We could get her to pay for a new tarp at least." Javi shook his head, running a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. "No, think about her face, Soph. That wasn't just a crazy person throwing a tantrum. She was terrified. Not of us, but of the water. And what she said? It's finding the way. That's not normal Karen garbage. That's something else." He walked over to the mill wall, the site of Mrs. Hollis's final panicked stare. The concrete, perpetually in shadow, felt clammy even in the heat. The water from the torn pool had vanished completely, sucked up by the thirsty earth and, more significantly, by the network of fine, dark fissures in the mill's foundation. He crouched down, running his finger along one of the cracks. It was hairline thin but deep. "This is the textile mill, right?" Javi asked, standing back up. Sophia frowned, pulling her damp shirt away from her skin. "Yeah, the old Oak Haven mill. Closed down maybe 20 years ago. It's been sitting there rotting. Why? Why would she think our little pool, a foot of water, would ruin the foundation and bring them back?" Javi pressed, his eyes scanning the endless, oppressive brickwork. "The foundation is made of concrete and brick. It's been through hurricanes. A kiddie pool isn't a threat unless the foundation is already weak. Seriously weak." Miguel, who had been nervously drawing patterns in the dirt with his toe, looked up, his eyes wide. "Are we talking about ghosts?" Lena slapped her brother's arm lightly. "Don't be stupid, Miggs. Javi's talking about a sinkhole, maybe." Javi ignored them, his mind working furiously. He knew the mill had a reputation, the kind of vague, spooky legend that sticks to any massive, abandoned building in a small community. He remembered his grandfather mentioning something about an accident decades ago. "We need to go inside," Javi announced, the words hanging heavy in the humid air. "Absolutely not," Sophia exploded. "That place is condemned." "Trespassing is a real crime, Javi, and you are not dragging us into it just because some weird old lady spooked you. Look, even if she is hiding something, it's probably just code violations or a toxic spill. Let the city handle it." "The city hasn't handled it in 20 years, Sophia. If it was a simple code violation, it wouldn't make her scream like that." That was the scream of someone who saw a memory brought back to life by water. Javi walked over to a rusted, heavy steel door, half concealed by kudzu vine marked with a faded keep-out sign. The padlock looked ancient, but the metal around the latch was suspiciously clean. "And besides," he added, pulling at the kudzu, "we don't get justice by calling the cops on a crazy old woman. We get justice by figuring out her secret and maybe, just maybe, finding something we can use against her." The door didn't budge. The old lock, a rusty fortress, was holding firm. "So much for that," Sophia muttered, crossing her arms. Javi didn't respond. He stepped back and studied the wall again, his memory flashing back to Mrs. Hollis's frantic movements, her eyes wide with terror, her focus on the wall itself. He walked 20 feet down from the door to the precise area where the last of the pool water had been absorbed. There, partially hidden by a drift of dry leaves and garbage, was a small circular metal plate set flush against the concrete. It was the size of a frisbee, but the edges were raised, suggesting it covered a larger access point. He knelt and started clearing away the debris. "This isn't a door, but it might as well be." Sophia reluctantly joined him, brushing away the leaves. "What is it?" "A maintenance hatch. Probably for a forgotten pipe or maybe an old utility line." Javi found a slight indent on the edge. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his everyday carry, a cheap, well-used multi-tool. He wedged the flat edge of the tool into the indent and applied pressure. The metal groaned in protest, but the lid held. "Javi, stop! Seriously, we're going to get caught!" Sophia warned, her eyes darting nervously toward the alley entrance. "We're already caught, Soph," he said, grunting with effort. "We're caught in her story now. She made it our problem the moment she ripped up our pool. With one final, violent tug, the metal plate screeched as it was ripped free. The sound was ear-splitting, tearing through the quiet afternoon. Javi and Sophia recoiled, coughing as a blast of cool, rank air rushed out of the hole, carrying with it the unmistakable, cloying scent of mold, stagnant water, and something else, a metallic, rusty smell that was somehow sweeter, thicker. Beneath the plate was a dark, square shaft leading down. It wasn't large, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, but it was a clear path into the mill's forgotten bowels. "Oh my God," Sophia whispered, peering into the blackness. "It goes straight down." Lena, holding Miguel by the hand, came closer. "What's down there, Javi?" Javi reached into his other pocket and pulled out his phone, flipping on the flashlight. The narrow beam stabbed into the darkness, revealing a rusty iron ladder descending into a space that appeared to be a vast, submerged cellar. The air down there was cold and wet, a sharp contrast to the blistering heat above. "It's the mill's basement," Javi said, his voice dropping low, suddenly captivated. "Or maybe an old sub-level. It's flooded. That's where our pool water went." His light beam danced across the surface of the water below. It was murky, opaque, reflecting the beam like black glass. Then, as he angled the light, it hit a strange, shimmering quality in the water's surface. Not reflections, but something in the water. "Wait a second," Javi muttered, leaning closer. "What is that?" He directed the beam to a spot near the bottom of the ladder. The water, maybe 4 feet deep, was not uniformly dark. There was a section near the wall that looked unnervingly bright. He moved the light again, tracing the shape. It was a perfectly circular object, sitting on the flooded floor, partially submerged. It wasn't the color of rust or concrete. It was a clean, pale, unsettling white. "It looks like a wheel," Sophia breathed, leaning next to him. "No, it's not a wheel," Javi whispered, his throat tightening. He stared harder, trying to reconcile the shape with his knowledge of the world. It was too smooth, too large for a gear. The white surface caught the light in a strange way, appearing both solid and porous. Then, the water shifted just a fraction, a lazy current stirred perhaps by their voices or the heat escaping the shaft. The object tilted, and the light beam fell fully across its shape. It wasn't a wheel. It was a bowl-like dome, perfectly curved, with 2 empty circular sockets set into its upper portion. Javi's blood went instantly cold. Sophia gasped, a small, choked sound of pure horror. "That's a skull," Javi said, the word catching in his throat like gravel. "It's a human skull submerged in the basement of the old Oakhaven mill." The terror in Mrs. Hollis's eyes, the talk of water finding its way, of bringing them back, suddenly slammed into Javi with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a sinkhole. This was a grave. And their little blue pool, their temporary escape, had not ruined the foundation. It had uncovered the terrible, watery evidence of a forgotten tragedy. A wave of nausea hit Javi. He had wanted justice. He had wanted a weapon against the Karen. He had found something infinitely darker. Before anyone could speak, before Javi could pull away or Sophia could scream, a heavy, metallic clang echoed from deep within the mill above them. It was the sound of a large, heavy door being forcefully, violently slamming shut somewhere on the ground floor. The air in the alley immediately felt different, thinner, colder, and far more dangerous. "Someone's here!" Sophia hissed, grabbing Javi's arm with an iron grip. Javi's heart leaped into his throat. He looked down the dark shaft where the grinning, waterlogged skull seemed to be the only witness, and then back up toward the mill. He had not only stumbled upon a decades-old secret, but he had also announced his presence to whoever was still here. "Protecting it. We have to go," he whispered, already scrambling backward on his hands and knees. But as he backed away from the open maintenance hatch, the cell phone in his hand slipped, tumbling out of his grasp. It hit the edge of the square shaft with a sharp clack, bounced once, and then, with a final echoing plop, it vanished beneath the black reflective surface of the flooded basement. The beam of his flashlight, now submerged, was still on. It was sending up a faint, sickly green glow from the depths, illuminating the pale, dreadful dome of the skull with a perfect, horrifying spotlight. The only light they had was now down there, marking the grave and, crucially, marking their discovery. And then from the other side of the mill wall, they heard the distinct, deliberate sound of... Javi's phone lay at the bottom of the mill's flooded sub-level, its sickly green light a beacon for both the dead and the living. The deliberate scraping sound of the shovel was an immediate, terrifying confirmation that they were not alone. Whoever was inside the Oak Haven mill was moving, and they were moving toward the source of the noise, the open, screeching hatch. "Get back!" Javi hissed, shoving Sophia hard. "Get behind the dumpster, now!" He grabbed Lena and Miguel, pulling them roughly toward a massive, rusted steel dumpster tucked near the alley's far corner, a grotesque metal bunker providing their only cover. They huddled down, their bodies pressed against the grimy metal, their breathing ragged and loud in the suffocating silence that had replaced their initial panic. The scraping sound intensified. It was close now, right on the other side of the brick wall, a sound of heavy measured work, not a casual stroll. Then the rhythmic scraping stopped. A new sound replaced it. A slow, heavy thump, 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 like something large and soft hitting the concrete near the hatch. Javi risked a peek around the edge of the dumpster. His eyes snapped to the hatch. The faint green glow of his phone was still coming from the depths, but the shaft above it was pitch black. The air above the hatch seemed to shimmer with the displaced cold air rising from below. A figure emerged. It wasn't Mrs. Hollis. It was a man. He was tall, heavily built, dressed in the uniform of a maintenance worker, faded blue coveralls, thick boots, but they looked well-worn, almost archaic. He was bald, with a blocky, impassive face and hands the size of baseball mitts. He was carrying a worn, oil-stained toolbox, and in his other hand, not a shovel, but a large, heavy steel pipe. He stopped directly next to the open hatch. His eyes, dark and flat, scanned the alley, moving slowly, methodically, like a security camera on a long, slow sweep. He didn't look frantic or scared. He looked methodical. He was hunting. "I know someone's here," the man's voice rumbled, low and gravelly, the sound echoing strangely in the narrow space. "You made a mess. You broke the lock. That's a mistake." He knelt down beside the hatch. Javi's entire body tensed, ready to bolt, but he knew the moment they ran, the man would pursue. He squeezed Sophia's arm, a silent command to remain absolutely still. The man peered into the shaft, his face illuminated briefly by the weak underwater glow of the phone. He must have seen it, the light, the disturbance, the undeniable evidence of entry. He didn't react with surprise. He reacted with cold, professional annoyance. He reached into the shaft and, with a quick, practiced movement, retrieved Javi's phone. He didn't examine it. He didn't look at the screen. He simply pulled his arm back, opened the heavy toolbox, and dropped the phone inside with a dull clunk. "You shouldn't have done that," the man said to the empty air, his voice unnervingly calm. He then looked down at the large, jagged tear in the blue vinyl tarp, which was now just a crumpled pile of wet cloth. He focused on the damp area around the hatch where their pool water had concentrated and drained. His expression hardened into something cold and menacing. "The water always finds the crack," he muttered, almost to himself. "Always." He stood up, pulling a heavy canvas sack from his coveralls. He dropped the sack right next to the open hole, then looked around the alley again, his eyes lingering on the precise spot where the kids were hiding. Javi held his breath, convinced their fear must be visible, radiating off the dumpster. Then the man did something unexpected. He pulled out a walkie-talkie from his belt. "The seal's been breached," he said into the device, his voice clipped and efficient. "Minor intrusion. Water migrated into sub-level A. They left a piece of equipment. I've secured it." There was a burst of static, and then a faint, tinny voice replied. Javi couldn't make out the words, but the tone was sharp and demanding. The man listened, his eyes still sweeping the alley. Negative. No visual confirmation on the trespassers. Small, probably children. They ran, but they saw the foundation breach and the result of the water migration. "We need to secure the exterior immediately. I'm sealing the hatch now. Tell her to stay inside. She's agitated." "Her." "Mrs. Hollis." The man ended the communication. He bent down again, reaching into the canvas sack. He didn't take out tools. He took out what looked like several heavy, pre-cut sheets of steel plating and a small welding torch. This wasn't a temporary fix. This was professional, permanent concealment. "He's welding the hatch shut," Sophia whispered, her voice tight with disbelief and terror. "He's burying whatever is down there." Javi watched, immobilized. The man fired up the torch, and a brilliant, blinding blue-white flash of light filled the alley, quickly followed by the high-pitched metallic sizzle of the welding arc. Sparks rained down, bouncing off the concrete. The smell of burning metal and ozone quickly overpowered the stale, rank scent from the basement. The man was sealing the hole, trapping the evidence, the skull, the water. Javi's phone, in a hastily constructed coffin of steel. It took 5 agonizing minutes. The sounds of the welding torch were deafening, a relentless assault that obscured every other noise. When the man finally killed the torch, the air was heavy with heat and the metallic tang of fresh welds. He tested the plate with the heel of his boot, gave a grunt of satisfaction, and then wiped his forehead with the back of a large hand. He didn't just seal the hole. He also picked up the remains of Javi's vinyl pool, folding the shredded blue tarp into a tight, neat bundle, and tossed it into a small black industrial garbage can that was conspicuously not there before. He then used a hose, which he seemed to pull from nowhere, to quickly wash down the area, rinsing away the last dark patches of absorbed water. When he was done, the section of the alley where their pool had been was clean, sterile, and silent. The only evidence left was the smooth, welded plate now covering the hatch and the faint, sweet metallic odor that still clung to the air. The man picked up his toolbox and his steel pipe. He looked one last time directly at the dumpster, a slow, flat smile spreading across his face. A smile that held no humor, only cold, absolute certainty. "I'll be seeing you," he said. And then he walked away, disappearing around the mill's corner, heading in the opposite direction from the street. The second he was gone, Javi pushed himself away from the dumpster, breathing in great, shuddering gasps of the hot air. "We saw him," Lena whispered, burying her face in Sophia's side. "He saw us. He didn't see us," Javi corrected, his voice raspy. "He knew we were here. He just didn't care enough to chase us down. Not while he had to cover that up." Sophia pulled away, her eyes wide with a new, sober terror. "He welded it shut, Javi. That wasn't just some crazy old lady's secret. That's organized. They're hiding something big, something dangerous. We have to go to the police now. We have to tell them about the skull, about the man." Javi rubbed the exhaustion and fear from his eyes. He looked at the sealed hatch. The man's efficient, professional cover-up was more terrifying than Mrs. Hollis's raw rage. "No," Javi said, his voice quiet but firm, the resolve in his eyes hardening. "If we go to the police, what do we have?" The word of 4 kids who trespassed on a condemned property, claiming a crazy old woman screamed at them, and a maintenance guy welded a plate over a hole where a skull might have been. "They'll tell us to go home and stay out of trouble. And this man, this cleaner, he'll make sure no one ever finds that plate again." He knelt by the fresh weld, placing his hand on the still warm metal. "He took my phone. That means he has my photos, my texts, and maybe even our location history. He knows who I am, or he will soon. He knows we saw. Calling the police now just puts us in the open with no proof and gives them time to move the evidence." He stood up, looking at his sister, his gaze intense. "We don't go to the police." "We go to Mrs. Hollis." Sophia stared at him, aghast. "You're insane. She's the one who started this. She was screaming at the water because she knew what was down there." "Exactly," Javi countered, his mind racing, connecting the disparate threads of the day's madness. "She wasn't angry at us for playing in the pool. She was terrified of what the water would do. She wasn't guarding the mill from us. She was guarding it for them. But then she tore up the pool anyway. That means she's conflicted. She knows the truth. And she panicked when our little makeshift water park threatened to expose it." He took a step toward the alley entrance, his legs still shaky, but his purpose clear. "She's the key. She's agitated, like the man said. She's the weak point. We go to her house tonight, and we force her to talk. We find out what's in that basement, what them she's trying to keep away, and who that man is working for. The secret is out, and they know we saw it. We can't hide anymore. We have to move faster than they can. This is insane. Javi, this is how people disappear, Sophia pleaded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Javi looked back at the mill wall, at the gleaming, sealed patch of metal. Maybe, but going to the cops is how we lose. And I'm not losing this one. Not after what she did, and not after what we saw. He started to walk out of the alley, toward the street, toward Mrs. Hollis's small, isolated house on the edge of the neighborhood. The heat had broken, but the air felt charged, thick with the electric promise of violence and revelation. He didn't look back to see if his siblings followed. He didn't have to. End of part 3. Javi led the way, his steps tight with adrenaline and his fear distilled into a cold, hard purpose. Sophia, Lena, and Miguel trailed him silently, a small, frightened brigade moving through the deepening twilight. The residential streets were quiet, the air thick with the smell of evening cooking and sprinkler-dampened grass, a jarring contrast to the violence and hidden horror of the alley. Mrs. Hollis lived 4 blocks away in a house that stood apart. It was a neat, square 1940s bungalow, painted a pale, innocuous yellow, but it felt intensely private. Tall, overgrown hedges choked the front yard, and the windows, though clean, were always shrouded by heavy, opaque curtains. It looked like a bunker disguised as a home. If she calls the police, we're done, Sophia hissed, grabbing Javi's shoulder as he reached the curb. She won't, Javi said, glancing back. The man told her to stay inside. She's agitated. They're trying to contain her, too. And if she calls the cops, she has to explain why she tore up a kid's pool and why there's a professional welder covering up a hole on the mill property that she seems terrified of. He pressed his back against the thick, thorny hedge. This is our only shot to get ahead of them. We hit her before they can neutralize her. Neutralize? Sophia's voice cracked. Javi, we're talking about murder now, aren't we? That man, he's covering up a murder. All the more reason to talk to the only witness who isn't us, Javi retorted, his eyes fixed on the house. The windows were dark, but a faint yellowish light flickered intermittently from behind the dense curtains in the front room. Okay. You talk to her. We wait here, Sophia said, pulling Lena and Miguel further back into the shadows. Javi didn't argue. He climbed the 3 porch steps and raised his hand to knock, but he hesitated. He remembered the unhinged intensity in her eyes, the sudden raw fear that had replaced her rage. He lowered his fist and instead pressed his ear close to the wooden front door. Nothing. Only the thick, heavy silence of a lonely house. He knocked, 2 quick, sharp raps. Silence. Then, from inside, a sound, not footsteps, but a brittle scraping sound. Like fingernails dragging across wallpaper, Javi knocked harder. Mrs. Hollis, it's Javi, the kid from the alley. We know what you did, and we know why. He waited. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. He was about to retreat when a whisper, thin and dry as old parchment, filtered through the wood. Go away. You'll bring them here. Javi pressed his face closer to the door. They're already here, Mrs. Hollis. We saw the man, the one who welded the hatch shut. He knows we were there. He took my phone. He thinks you're agitated. He's trying to control the narrative, just like you are. Now open the door! He heard a lock mechanism click, slow and old. The door didn't open immediately. Instead, the heavy curtain on the adjacent window was abruptly yanked back. Mrs. Hollis was there, separated from him by a sheet of glass. The light behind her was dim, illuminating her face in a ghoulish, low-contrast glow. Her long gray hair was wild, tangled, and her icy blue eyes were wide and bloodshot, fixed on Javi with an intensity that burned through the glass. She looked like a captive strung taut between fear and fury. You should have left it alone, she hissed, her voice a reedy rasp. The water had to be stopped. It loosens things. It brings the surface down. You children have no idea what you've unleashed. We know there's a body down there. Javi shot back, slamming his hand lightly on the window pane. A skull. Your water panic? It's about a murder you covered up. The word murder seemed to shatter the last of her self-control. Her face crumpled, the tight mask of the Karen collapsing into sheer, agonizing grief. No. Not murder, she wailed, pressing her hands against the glass. It was an accident. I told them it would happen. I told them to fix the pipes. The mill. It wasn't built for that kind of moisture. The pressure. It was too much. Tears, thick and fast, tracked clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. It was the sluice gate. It was cheap work. I saw the cracks. And then, the pressure. It gave way. It all came down, Javi stared, trying to process the sudden, overwhelming confession. The sluice gate? What are you talking about? The reservoir. They used the mill basement as a temporary holding tank for the old creek diversion. 20 years ago, the day it opened. The day the basement filled. She choked on her words, gripping the curtains for support. It wasn't just water, you idiot boy. It was the force. The wall gave way. And the little ones, Javi felt a cold spike of understanding. The little ones. The mill workers? Mrs. Hollis shook her head violently, her long gray hair whipping around her face. No, my baby. My little Thomas. He was just 5. They were playing near the diversion site. The contractor, the owner, they knew the structure was bad. They covered up the reports. When the gate blew, the ground near the mill just collapsed. It created a sinkhole, Javi. A fast, watery, concrete-shattering sinkhole. And they told the police it was an earthquake. They said it was an act of God. The confession spilled out like pus from an old wound thick with 2 decades of suppressed agony. They sealed the mill, but they didn't get him out, she sobbed, tapping frantically on the glass above her heart. They left him. They said the water pressure was too high. The cleanup man, the one you saw, he was the foreman. He brought the concrete. He sealed my baby's grave for the insurance money. I swore I'd protect the place. I swore I'd keep the water out. I swore I'd never let the water level rise high enough to loosen the dirt and bring him up. The image of the pale, smooth skull, submerged and waiting, flashed into Javi's mind. It wasn't just a dead person. It was a child, submerged in a corporate tomb, and Mrs. Hollis was his demented, rage-filled sentinel. Her Karen demands, her screaming, were not about noise complaints. They were the desperate, protective fury of a grieving mother trying to keep her son's watery grave sealed. You tore up our pool because you were afraid our small amount of water would loosen the earth and float him up, Javi whispered, the horror of the realization settling over him. Yes, she shrieked. Your water. It went right to the weak spot. It's bringing the surface down. He's coming up. They'll move him. They'll scatter the evidence. They have to pay, Javi. They have to see what they did. Who is they now? Javi demanded, pushing past his revulsion. Who is the cleaner working for? Mrs. Hollis, exhausted, leaned her forehead against the cool glass. The company. The holding company that owned the mill. They dissolved the entity after the insurance payout. But the man. The owner. He lives in the city. He paid the foreman off. The foreman's name is Cyrus. He's the one who buried my son. He's the one who comes when the water levels shift. As Javi was about to press for the owner's name, a piercing, insistent sound cut through the silence. Not a scream, not a shovel, but the high-pitched electronic wail of a home security alarm. Javi jumped back. Cyrus, the cleaner. He hadn't just taken Javi's phone. He had already found his number, run his information, and, anticipating where Javi would go, the only other person who knew the truth, he had activated the local surveillance. The alarm was coming from Cyrus's toolbox, which was still ringing inside the mill. But it was also ringing on Mrs. Hollis's property. He had tagged the kids and their destination. It's them! They're coming! Mrs. Hollis shrieked, backing away from the window, her hands flying back to her face, a fresh, primal terror seizing her. The front door, which she had only partially unlocked, was suddenly hit by a tremendous, splintering blow. The frame cracked. Mrs. Hollis, get out of there! Javi yelled, recognizing the brutal, measured force of the maintenance man. Another blow. The wood groaned, a sound like a mortally wounded animal. Javi looked desperately at the front yard. There was no time to run. He had to draw Cyrus away. He spun around, sprinting off the porch and straight into the thick, thorny hedge. Javi, no! Sophia screamed from the street. The front door exploded inward with a final massive crash. Javi scrambled blindly through the dense foliage, the thorns raking his arms and face. He burst through the hedge onto the front lawn, and there, Bathed in the sickly green light of a nearby lamppost, he finally saw the face of the man who had torn open the door. Cyrus. He was holding the heavy steel pipe he'd had in the alley. His face was a mask of cold fury, his eyes immediately locking onto Javi. "You shouldn't have done that, boy," Cyrus growled, taking a slow, menacing step toward him. "You should have stayed where you were." Javi didn't hesitate. He pointed frantically across the yard toward the back of the house. "She's escaping. She went out the back window. She has the documentation. She has the proof." The lie was desperate, stupid, but the terror in Javi's voice made it convincing. Cyrus paused, a split second of professional calculus overriding his immediate desire to seize Javi. The priority was the evidence, the loose end. "Mrs. Hollis," Cyrus cursed, a guttural sound, and pivoted, running not toward Javi, but around the side of the house, his heavy boots pounding the lawn. Javi didn't wait. He ran back toward the hedge, ignoring the stinging pain of his wounds. But as he reached the shattered porch, a scream erupted from the open front door, a final, gut-wrenching, agonizing shriek of pure maternal despair. Javi skidded to a stop, his blood freezing in his veins. He looked through the wreckage of the door, into the dimly lit living room, and saw Mrs. Hollis not trying to escape, but essay. The high-pitched wail of Mrs. Hollis's security alarm was a siren call to disaster, broadcasting the scene of the violence. Javi didn't run toward safety. He ran back toward the source of the conflict, the silent, dark walls of the Oak Haven mill. "Javi! Stop!" Sophia screamed, stumbling to keep pace, her face streaked with tears and fear. Lena and Miguel were behind her, small, gasping engines of terror. "We have to go home. We have to tell someone. And get cornered by Arthur and Cyrus?" Javi gasped, running on the adrenaline of pure survival. "Arthur is the owner. He covered it up once, and now he knows we know. He's not leaving the area. He's coming back here to make sure his grave is secure. This is the only place we have the advantage." They reached the alley, now bathed in a sliver of weak moonlight. The mill wall loomed, an oppressive monument to corporate cruelty. The newly welded plate glinted dully, a shield over the truth. "What's the plan?" Sophia demanded, clutching his arm, her fear giving way to a desperate, pragmatic focus. "Cyrus used a hose to clean up the water," Javi panted, his eyes scanning the debris near the dumpster. "They must have an external spigot here somewhere. They needed to move quickly, so it can't be far." He found it behind a heavy, rusting HVAC unit, a bronze spigot, barely visible, connected to a thick, industrial-grade hose already coiled neatly nearby. It was clearly the cleanup equipment hastily left by Cyrus. "Arthur's key," Javi muttered, running his hand over the welded plate. "That's how they get in. He just beat Mrs. Hollis with the key to the mill. We need to make him use it. Now." "How?" Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. Javi grabbed the hose, pulling it taut. They were terrified of the water. They were afraid it would bring the surface down and expose Thomas. "We can't chip through that weld, but we can make the ground around it unstable. We can force a second collapse." Sophia's eyes widened with horror. "You're going to flood the basement?" "Javi, that will ruin any remaining evidence, and it could make the whole wall collapse." "Exactly," Javi said, pulling the hose toward the welded patch. "We don't have time for slow proof. We need an emergency that forces Arthur to open that door. We need a disaster so visible and loud that the police, the fire department, the entire world comes here and sees him trying to cover it up." He found the valve and twisted the spigot handle violently. The ancient pipe system groaned, and then, with a pressurized whoosh, the industrial hose erupted with a thick, powerful jet of water. Javi directed the stream not at the weld, but at the ground immediately surrounding it. He knew the water from their small pool had already found the structural weakness. Now he was applying the force of a full, unrestricted industrial line to that same fragile soil and substrata. The water immediately began to pool, turning the dry, compacted earth into a muddy torrent. It flowed rapidly, silently, into the hairline cracks of the pavement and the deep fissures of the mill's foundation. He could hear a slight sickening sucking sound as the ground drank the deluge. They only had seconds. Arthur and Cyrus were on their way back. Suddenly, a loud metallic shudder echoed from deep within the mill. The sound was like a massive ship's hull scraping against rock. Javi watched, adrenaline making his focus diamond sharp. The ground around the weld began to quiver. Then, a section of the asphalt, about 5 feet wide, gave way. It wasn't a sudden drop, but a quick, terrifying sag. A dark black crevice, inches wide, opened up along the base of the mill wall near the weld. "It's working!" Javi yelled over the rushing water, his voice a mixture of terror and triumph. "It's collapsing!" But the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The water that had been rapidly draining now surged back, erupting out of the new crack in a torrent, mixed with black, muddy slurry and, most horrifyingly, a stream of pulverized, aged concrete dust. The pressure was blowing the sealant out. Then came the sound that silenced the water and the children's panic. A low, grinding roar from inside the mill, followed by a series of sharp, whip-like cracks. The main door of the mill, the massive, rusted steel behemoth they couldn't budge earlier, began to buckle. The top hinge screamed in protest as the entire frame twisted. "Javi, look!" Sophia pointed down the alley entrance. 2 figures were sprinting toward them. Cyrus, his blue coveralls dark with sweat and exertion, and Arthur, his expensive suit now rumpled, running with a surprising panicked speed. They were drawn by the sound of the collapse, the catastrophic evidence of the truth literally rising to meet them. "You brat!" Cyrus bellowed, his face contorted in a mask of murderous rage, the steel pipe held high. "You just sealed your own fate!" Javi dropped the hose. The pipe was still attached to the spigot, now whipping wildly, spraying water in a frantic, unguided arc. He grabbed Sophia and pulled her backward away from the collapse site. Arthur stopped, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't look at the children. He looked at the fissure, at the water, at the mill door that was now vibrating violently. He saw the truth escaping. "Cyrus!" "Forget them. The seal is breached. The whole basement is coming down. Get the key. We have to secure the—" Arthur's words cut off as he saw the hose, still connected, still gushing water, and realized the malice and intent behind the action. Arthur then did the only thing he could. He reached into his suit pocket, pulled out the heavy brass key, and sprinted toward the main steel door. Cyrus, abandoning the pipe, rushed Javi, his massive hands reaching out. Javi shoved Sophia away and dodged the grab, tripping over a loose piece of brick. Cyrus's momentum carried him past, directly toward the collapsing foundation. Before Cyrus could correct his balance, the ground beneath his feet near the weld gave way with a final, wet smash. The surface asphalt, already undermined, plunged into the newly created sinkhole. Cyrus didn't even have time to scream. He was swallowed by the earth, the heavy, churning mud and water closing over him with a thick, sucking sound. The steel pipe, which he had dropped nearby, spun once and vanished into the muddy, waterlogged hole. Javi stared, immobilized. The man who had buried the child was now buried himself, consumed by the very structure he had helped seal. Then, the focus snapped back to Arthur. Arthur had reached the mill door. He fumbled with the key, his hands shaking, trying to locate the lock mechanism that was now partially covered by twisted metal. He was desperate to get inside, perhaps to reach the control panel, to somehow stabilize the sluice gate, or to find a way to move the final definitive piece of evidence. "Don't!" Javi screamed, stepping back toward the hose. Arthur finally found the keyhole. He jammed the brass key in and began to turn it. Just as the lock began to click, the internal structure of the mill, weakened by 2 decades of moisture and the sudden internal pressure from Javi's deliberate flooding, gave way. It wasn't the sluice gate. It was the central vertical pipe that had carried the diverted creek water. The ancient metal pipe, a pressurized column running up the entire height of the mill, burst. The result was cataclysmic. A tremendous boom echoed through the building, a pressure wave that blew the steel door completely off its moorings. The door, a massive, several hundred-pound sheet of rusted metal, flew outward, propelled by the blast of internal pressure. Arthur, standing directly in front of it, didn't have a chance to move. The door struck him squarely, crushing him instantly against the concrete lintel. A moment of horrifying, absolute silence followed, broken only by the constant rush of the abandoned hose, which was still spraying a powerful jet of water into the collapse site. The mill door lay crumpled on the ground. a grotesque man-made tombstone. Arthur, the powerful owner, was utterly silenced, pinned beneath the very symbol of the wealth and secrecy he had built upon a child's grave. Javi, Sophia, Lena, and Miguel stood frozen, silent witnesses to the swift, brutal justice delivered by a vengeful rising water. The child in the basement, Thomas, had finally been avenged. From the hole where Cyrus had vanished, a final slow current of water emerged. It wasn't dark mud. It was a swirling, opaque foam, carrying with it a faint, pale shape. The shape settled on the edge of the collapse site, half submerged. It was Javi's phone. He didn't move. Sophia walked slowly forward, her eyes wide with shock and adrenaline, and picked it up. The screen miraculously was still on, albeit cracked. She looked at Javi. Then at the devastation, Cyrus vanished, Arthur crushed. The entire mill compromised. "We have to call someone," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "We have proof now. We have everything." She held out the phone. Javi took it, his fingers closing around the damp casing. It felt cold, heavy, like the weight of the terrible secret they had just exposed. The faint green light of the screen illuminated the alley, casting long, wavering shadows. And then, above the wreckage and the sound of the running water, they all heard the distinct, wailing approach of police sirens, not from their call, but from the initial alarm at Mrs. Hollis's house. They were too late for Mrs. Hollis, but they were arriving at the final scene of the disaster. Javi looked at his sister, his expression grim but resolute. He didn't look at the mill. He looked toward the approaching lights. "Let the water talk," Javi said, his voice hard with finality. "We tell them everything." The water continued to gush, a symbol of tragedy, a weapon of reckoning, and the final unstoppable proof. End of Part 5.